This is why you should never trust a clown. Today's location used to belong to the American serial killer and sex offender John Wayne Gacy, who assaulted and murdered at least 33 young men and boys. John would dress up as this clown and would perform at children's hospitals and charitable events, and even host his own events at his house and invite the whole neighborhood. Which he did this so many times that this became his other life, his secret life. John would become known as this killer clown due to his many appearances he made in this clown costume. And what they found made this crime become one of the most notorious discoveries in American history. Hi, I'm Zach, and welcome to Rooted Expeditions. If you're a fan of the abandoned, historical, and strange locations, then you are in the right place. Please hit that thumbs up and let's get started in today's location. Met John Wayne Gacy, you would have thought he was just an ordinary guy. He had a great personality and made anyone that was around him feel comfortable. He had a very successful construction business, he attended church, he was married, he built him a very good reputation in his community. He became admired and loved and respected by neighbors, friends, and even police officers. And on top of that, he would throw these huge block parties at his house. He would invite the whole neighborhood, and he would dress up in his alter ego, which was Pogo the Clown. And he would entertain the kids and even the adults. Everyone just thought that John was this nice guy who wanted to give back to his community. But they would never guess that John had a very dark and sinister secret. In fact, this alternate life that John had was so secret that not even his second wife, Carol, knew about it. One day, Carol was doing something around the house and started to smell this weird and strange odor coming from the crawl space beneath their home. So she would tell John, hey, I think there's this strange smell coming from underneath the house where this crawl space is. And John would tell her, oh yeah, that's the runoff from the sewer pipes. Now, I will take care of it, don't you worry. So John would attempt to cover up the smell by spreading concrete and lime down in that crawl space where that smell was coming from. Hold up, let's back up just a bit. In 1968 in Waterloo, Iowa, John was a restaurant manager and a father of two, and married with his first wife. This family life that John had was quickly shattered when a high school boy told his dad that John served him alcohol and then forced him to watch mature-rated films and even tried to assault him. It was even said that John tried to strangle this boy. The boy's father, hearing this, was outraged and went to authorities and told them what happened, and then the police arrested John. John was afraid that this boy would testify, so he would hire this high school senior at the school to intimidate by beating this boy up to keep him quiet so he wouldn't say anything. But this wouldn't go according to John's plan. In fact, it would backfire and the boy would still testify against John. John would end up being convicted of sodomy and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. But he would only serve 18 months as it was reported he was able to get out early because of good behavior. By the time he was out, he was divorced as his wife divorced him as soon as he went to prison and had no place to live or any place to go. So the only place he could go was his mother's house, which was back into his hometown in Chicago. So John left his life in Iowa and everyone he knew and had and headed to Chicago and moved into his mother's house. And this would be a new start for John, as no one would know his past or what he did. While living with his mother, it wouldn't take long for John to get back up on his feet. He started up a construction business which was named PDM Contractors, and he started to build this new life for himself. And it started to go very well. So well, in fact, that he ended up moving from his mother's house where he lived and was able to get him a new place of his own not far away in Norwood Park, which the small home that sat on the street of Somerdale Avenue would become famously known in America for the gruesome events that would take place. But again, when no one was watching, John would have this alternate life full of secrets. He had this obsession of violence to assault these young men and boys and kill them. This was like a drug to him, and it just couldn't be stopped. If John was out and spotted someone he wanted to be with, that was it. There was nothing that was going to stop him from achieving his desires to commit these awful crimes. In 1972, John was at a bus station when he spotted a young boy who was named Timothy McCoy, who was 16 years old. They striked up a conversation, everything was going great, and John was able to convince Timothy to come back to his house where they would hang out, talk, and drink, and then John would assault him, and when John was done, he would stab Timothy to death and bury him underneath his house through that crawl space, which this would be John Gacy's first known kill. Then, only a few months after that, John would marry his second wife, Carol, which was his childhood friend. Okay, so let's fast forward to when Carol was in the house when she smelt this awful smell that she claimed was coming from this crawl space of their home. That was the body of Timothy McCoy. And for John in his secret life, this was just the beginning of this ongoing rampage that he had. These boys and young men would start going missing. In 1975, a teenager who worked for John named John Butkovich went missing, which his parents would file a missing persons report and tell police to investigate John, that he might have something to do with it. But police ignored this and pushed it to a side. This wouldn't be the first person that worked for John to go missing, and all of John's employees were young men. Reports would start to pile up on John, with several parents wanting police to investigate John. But since police never looked at the background of John Gacy, they would never know that he probably had something to do with these missing boys or missing men. Now, keep in mind, John had a very good reputation with the city officials, so when someone would make a claim, it would be passed aside for whatever reason. Possibly that they thought that John, being this nice guy and giving back to the community, that he would never be a part of this type of crime. Again, John would dress up as this clown and entertain kids. He loved this role as a clown, and this was a role that he could be someone different, someone who could hide behind a mask. He would go to hospitals and entertain sick kids, and he would even go to the elderly and entertain them, giving off this persona that he was this innocent clown or guy who wouldn't hurt anyone. What is even stranger is that at one point when John was talking to detectives, he would make a chilling statement and say, clowns can get away with anything. Clowns can get away with murder. Then in the beginning of 1976, John and Carol would get a divorce, which this would give John more time and freedom to continue his murderous rampage. In fact, the killing spree would pick up in a fast pace, and he would claim about 24 more victims within 1 year. He would travel around town dressed in his Pogo the Clown outfit, entertaining at different places. Then when he was done with that night, he would go out and lure boys back to his house where he would assault and torture them. And he would kill them after he was done and hide them underneath his house through this crawl space. This is really messed up. Now, this is where everything turns upside down for John. One day in 1978, a man walked into a store claiming he was going to be doing some construction work to this building, and a 15-year-old employee, Robert Peast, who was working at the store, overheard this man talking about doing the construction at this building, and he wanted to go talk to this man to see if he was hiring. Now, Robert Peast was a great kid, and he was an athlete. He was a hard worker. He never got in trouble. He was well known in his school, and he wanted to become a photographer. So he was working this job at the store to save up money for a new camera and, of course, a new car. Which, getting a nice car in that time period for young men was a thing. Yeah, it was a thing. So when the man walked out of the store, Robert told one of his coworkers, hey, I'm going to go talk to this guy real quick about maybe possibly getting a job. And the coworker said, okay. So Robert went out the back door. Now, when Robert's mom came to the store to pick up Robert from work, she couldn't find Robert and asked one of his coworkers, hey, have you seen Robert? And the coworker said, yeah, he's outside talking to some guy. And Robert's mom says, no, I didn't see him outside. Well, if you do see him, could you let him know that I was here to pick him up, and whenever he needs me to come pick him up, just to have him call me and I'll come pick him up. But when Robert never returned back to work or even come back home, his parents started to worry and would file a missing persons report, and police would follow a trail which would lead all the way to the owner of this construction company. And the house that the police were led to was 36-year-old John Gacy. Police would end up getting a search warrant and search John's house. While investigators searched John's home, they found a high school class ring, clothes that definitely didn't fit John, and other suspicious items. They even found a receipt that was linked to Robert Peast. So with all the odd items in John's house, investigators were not really able to find any bodies or at the time link him to any crime, so he couldn't be arrested. But they were able to put together that Robert Peast and John somehow at one point were together because of that receipt. But investigators would dig a little deeper and find John's conviction in Iowa in 1968 and had a good feeling that he probably had something to do with Robert Peast going missing. So police would set up surveillance and follow John around to wherever he would go to see if he would slip up so that they could arrest him. Investigators would talk to his family and friends and even his neighbors, and they would all speak so highly of John. Again, John had built this tight reputation with everyone, which became this barrier between the police and John. It was also said that some young men that were 17, 18, or even possibly 19 years old would tell investigators that when they were hanging out with John over at his house a while back, he would tell them that he would need help with this sewer problem that he had. And he would tell them that he would need them to get down underneath his house in this crawl space to dig a trench out to help fix this sewer problem that he had. So as they were down into this crawl space digging this trench for this whatever sewer problem that John was claiming that he had, they would go and tell investigators that they could smell this awful smell, but they were unaware that this was the decomposing bodies of John's victims. Investigators now had an idea that after hearing what these teenage boys were telling them, that there's a possibility that John had buried a body down underneath this crawl space. They thought even though that there was a tight space underneath that house and that crawl space, it still could be done. And that was one place they did look, but they didn't really investigate when they were searching his property. Now, they had to find a reason to get another search warrant to search the house again to see if this was true. At this point, John even knew that the investigators were following him around. He would walk up to them and even talk to them, and he would try to show them that he was this nice guy, that he was innocent, that he had nothing to do with anything that they were accusing him of. And he would even claim to a lot of people that, hey, these are my friends. They would follow him for about 7 days, and each day would get more intense as the investigators would talk to everyone that John knew and let him know what was going on, and those people would start retracting from John. And when they started doing this, that was breaking that barrier. So that started to put a lot of pressure on John. So John thought that he was probably going to get caught. So one night he would call his attorneys and he would set up in a meeting where he would immediately go over there and to their office and talk to his attorneys. And while he was inside, the investigators would sit out front of the office while John was inside talking to the attorneys. And while John was inside and the investigators were sitting outside, they were watching the building, they saw the attorneys come to the door and wave the investigators to come inside the building. Now, how did they know they were out front? I don't know. Maybe John told them that they were following him. The investigators were like, this is not good and way out of character for these attorneys to do something like this. So they got out of their car and went up to the attorneys, which they told them, hey, come inside, we need to talk to you. Which, come to find out, when they went inside, John was sleeping in the other room. The investigators asked the attorneys, hey, what's going on here? And they said, park your car outside of John's house and don't let him leave. If he leaves, shoot his tires out. The attorneys were pacing back and forth, not taking their eyes off John, who was sleeping in the other room. He had this look of terror and panic that something was really wrong. Now, due to the law, attorneys couldn't tell investigators what John told them. Even though what John said, they would later claim that they wish they could have told the investigators what John told them. And the investigators starting to pick up on the situation, and they started to figure out that John probably confessed to some of the murders of these missing men and boys. But they didn't have a clue that John went to the attorneys and told them everything and described each victim in detail and how they were killed. And then after he was able to tell them everything, it was like this big weight was lifted off of John's chest. And after he told them everything, he went and fell asleep. So when John woke up, he looked at the attorneys and said, "Hey, what am I doing here?" The attorneys said, "You don't remember what you said? You told us everything in details of the crimes you committed." In a panic, John left his attorney's office and was driving very aggressively to go wherever he was going. And he would end up stopping at this gas station that he normally goes to. And he saw this employee out by the pump, and he handed him a bag of weed and said, "Here, take this." And he got in his car and then he sped off. When the investigators saw this transaction that John just made with this employee, investigators would approach this employee and say, hey, we saw what just happened. And the employee would say, hey, I didn't buy this or even ask for it. He just gave it to me, got in his car, and sped off. So they would chase after John. And when they caught up to John, they would pull him over and they yanked him out of the car, and he would plead with them, "Hey, what are you doing? Hey, I didn't do anything wrong. I thought we were friends. Why are you doing this?" What landed John in jail was a drug charge, and that is what put the nail in the coffin. From there, the investigators working the case were finally able to get that second search warrant that they were so desperately needing. So on December 21st, 1978, police searched the property of where John Gacy lived, and they immediately went to that crawl space. And one of the investigators got down into that crawl space underneath that house and crawled around with his shovel, looking around to see if there's any disturbances in the dirt or any signs that something could be buried or something was down there. So as he was looking around, he saw these red worms coming from this muck or this dirt, this mud coming from underneath the house, and he thought this was very strange. So he grabbed his shovel and started to dig, and as soon as he dug into the ground, he hit something. And what he hit was a decomposing body of John's victim. And right then and there, they knew they got him. After John knowing that they finally caught him, he would finally make a confession, but he would only confess to the surveillance team that was watching him from those 7 days, which when he did, he would confess to the murders of 30 young men and boys. Over the next several weeks, investigators would dig up and find 29 bodies in John's house that were all underneath his home. And they found 4 more bodies by a river southeast of Chicago. John was indicted for 33 murders in 1979, and this became the largest number ever charged to one person in American history. Then in 1994, John Wayne Gacy was put to death by lethal injection. This crime has left a gruesome and heartfelt event that has forever changed this neighborhood, and not only that, but America. The home that John lived in, where all the bodies were found, no longer stands, so you will never be able to see the original building. But in its place, they built a new home, and I believe they even changed the address so that it makes it a little bit harder to find, as it became a big tourist attraction. Here's a little bit of history for you. Please subscribe. Peace, I love you, and as always, God bless.